Hello scholars, welcome. Mr. Hinkle here. Let's talk about channel types, which is the way that a river looks, channel morphology, and we'll discuss three main types of them, and they are created by the processes of erosion and deposition. Remember, a stream is moving water confined to a channel. These channels have different characteristics based on where they're at in the river system and also the local geology that they are moving through. So processes in a river, erosion, deposition, giving us three different types of channels: braided, straight, and meandering. Let's go through each one of them, starting with braided. So here's a bank of the river. Here's another bank of the river. Braided streams, in fact, let's start to put these up here. Channel types. And the first we're discussing is braided. What we see in braided rivers, fluvial processes, high sediment load, high velocity, low gradient. So they're relatively flat. They have a lot of sediment, in fact, more sediment than they do water. So the water redistributes and forms multiple little channels within that river system. We see these occurring often in flat areas that are draining mountains or in places that have had glaciers, and there's a lot of glacial till or glacially eroded material that is dumped into the river, and they then take on this certain channel morphology. A couple examples here. Here we go. I'll do a little do-si-do and twirly twirl. Okay, so lots of sediment, many different channels that are separating, coming back together, indicating a braided stream. Here's another one. Steep mountains, but here, between these mountains, it's relatively shallow, low gradient, so flat. Lots of sediment eroding from these surrounding mountains. Lots of water that's moving it around, but more sediment than there is water. Cool. Straight channels sounds exactly, or they are exactly the way that they sound. It is a channel usually high up in the mountains that has a straight orientation. It makes its way straight down, but it adjusts in different ways. Here you see boulders and a pool, boulders and a pool, boulders and a pool, boulders. This is a step pool morphology. You can see the mountains. So these streams are usually located up in the headwaters. They have very steep gradients, low discharge and velocity, and low sediment load. And what they end up carving are V-shaped channels because the river is eroding and cutting into the landscape. When we talk about glaciers, I'll just clue us in. An indication of a glacially carved landscape is a wide U-shaped valley because glaciers basically come in and bulldoze the landscape, creating nice wide valleys. But we'll talk about that in another lecture. Examples here. Mountains, very steep. Mountains, you can see the gradient here, very steep. Turbulent water, lots of big rocks. This is within the zone of erosion. Meandering. Let's go for a little stroll, meander through town. Well, meandering rivers are cool rivers. And this channel type is a single channel that curves back and forth, kind of like a snake coiling. It's the transition from the zone of erosion to the zone of transport, creating a very wide floodplain that can make these loops, and sometimes they can cut off these loops, creating oxbow lakes. It's a side-to-side motion, and what's happening here is as the river goes from steep to less steep along the longitudinal profile, the way that it can adjust its slope is by increasing its length, thus forming meanders. So there's this idea in rivers called equilibrium, that rivers adjust their shape and gradient to meet the amount of sediment and water that's input into the system. And so rivers are tending towards an equilibrium. It's dynamic though because of floods and dry years and wet years, but they tend towards an equilibrium and they adjust their morphology in order to meet the inputs into the river system. It's beautiful. I love it. Here we can see a nice big meander bend. We've got the cut bake on the outside, the bar on the inside. Aerial view, this river is meandering in size down into the landscape. So cool. You can even see some old meander scars here that have been filled in because rivers are very dynamic features that change their course over time. Yeah. Love it. Rivers are so cool. They might be my favorite thing on Earth, geologic thing, that is, outside of my family and my friends and living. But in terms of geology, love rivers. And rivers have three main channel types: braided, straight, meandering. This is by no means an exhaustive list because they are very dynamic features of the landscape, but we commonly see these three main channel types in response to the fluvial processes and the characteristics of the local geology at a given place where you would label one of these three channel types. So this is channel morphology or channel types. Thank you so much. I'll see you again.